In September 2019, one of the most anticipated IPOs in history died in 8 weeks. A company valued at $47 billion was suddenly worth almost nothing. Not because of a market crash. Not because of a recession. Because people finally read the paperwork. WeWork had convinced Wall Street it was a tech company. It had convinced SoftBank to hand over $10 billion. It had convinced the media that renting desks was a revolution. Over 12,000 employees believed in the mission. Many had taken lower salaries in exchange for company stock. That stock would soon be worth zero. The man behind all of it walked away with $1.7 billion. His name was Adam Neumann. And he had been investigated, and cleared, multiple times before this. So how did a glorified landlord almost pull off the biggest con in startup history? And why did some of the smartest money in the world hand him the gun? To understand that, we need to go back to where the illusion began. Adam Neumann grew up in Israel, moving between cities as a kid. He served in the Israeli Navy, then landed in New York with $2,000 and a dream. His first business was selling baby knee pads. It failed. His second was a collapsible high-heel shoe company. That failed too. But Neumann had something most failed entrepreneurs don't. He could walk into a room and make you believe anything. A former colleague once said talking to Adam felt like standing next to a fire. You wanted to stay warm, even when you knew you might get burned. In 2010, he partnered with architect Miguel McKelvey in Manhattan. They had a simple idea: sublease office space and rent it out by the desk. That's it. That was the entire business model. A company pays $50,000 a month for a floor in Midtown. WeWork rents it out as hot desks for $500 a month each. Pack in 200 people, and you're printing money. But here's the thing, this wasn't new. Shared office spaces had existed since the 1980s. A company called Regus had been doing the exact same thing for decades. So Neumann did something Regus never thought to do. He rebranded subletting as a social movement. WeWork wasn't an office rental company. It was a physical social network. It was a community company. It was going to elevate the world's consciousness. That last line was in official company documents. Investors laughed, then wrote the checks anyway. Because here's the systemic flaw that made WeWork possible. After 2008, the investment world was starving for the next big tech company. Uber had just proven a taxi app could be worth $70 billion. Airbnb showed that renting out spare rooms could beat hotel chains. The formula seemed simple: take any old industry, add an app, become a unicorn. WeWork had an app. WeWork had a slick interface. WeWork had free beer in the kitchens and motivational murals on the walls. That was apparently enough. In 2014, venture capital firm Benchmark valued WeWork at $1.5 billion. The company had barely turned a profit. Nobody asked too many questions. Because here's the number that made WeWork look like a tech company. They called it community-adjusted EBITDA. This is where it gets interesting. EBITDA is a standard financial metric: earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Companies use it to show operating profitability. WeWork took that legitimate formula and quietly subtracted their biggest cost: building expenses, marketing, general operations. Remove those, and suddenly WeWork looked wildly profitable. This metric appeared nowhere in standard accounting rules. WeWork invented it. The Wall Street Journal called it made-up math. But in pitch decks, it made WeWork look like a money machine. And this was all technically legal, because it was clearly labeled. It was disclosed, just buried. The people who should have caught it didn't look hard enough. Or they chose not to. There was also a second problem hiding in plain sight. WeWork signed long-term leases, some up to 15 years. Then it rented those same spaces on short-term contracts, sometimes month to month. This meant WeWork owed landlords billions in guaranteed rent. But its own tenants could leave whenever they wanted. In a recession, every tenant would bail at once. But WeWork's lease obligations wouldn't disappear. The company had quietly built a financial time bomb. By 2017, WeWork owed $18 billion in future lease payments. That number was buried on page 145 of their financial statement. And yet, the valuation kept climbing. Because by now, one man had entered the picture. A man who didn't do due diligence. A man who wrote checks based on gut feelings and 12-minute meetings. His name was Masayoshi Son. And he was about to make everything dramatically worse. Masayoshi Son is one of the richest men in the world. He runs SoftBank, a Japanese investment giant with hundreds of billions to deploy. His strategy is simple: find the most ambitious founder in any industry. Write them the biggest check they've ever seen. Bet that sheer scale will crush every competitor. In December 2016, Son toured a WeWork location in New York. The meeting lasted 12 minutes. 12 minutes. Son pulled out an iPad, sketched a rough valuation on a napkin. He wrote down $20 billion. Newman crossed it out and wrote $40 billion. Son reportedly laughed and agreed to invest $4.4 billion. No detailed financial review. No stress testing the lease liability model. No asking why a rentals company deserved a tech company valuation. Just a napkin, a handshake, and billions of dollars. Later, Son would say he preferred crazy founders over rational ones. In the board meeting, he said, the crazy ones win. Newman had found the one investor on Earth perfectly suited to his con. And now he had rocket fuel. Between 2017 and 2019, WeWork opened locations in 111 cities across 29 countries. New offices launched every week. Each one more expensive, more lavishly designed than the last. Climbing walls. Meditation rooms. Nap pods. Cold brew on tap. WeWork spent $16,000 per desk to fit out some location. The industry average was $5,000. But Newman wasn't just building offices. He was building an empire around himself. The company leased buildings, then Newman personally bought those same buildings. He then charged WeWork rent to occupy them. He was literally his own landlord, billing his own company. Newman pocketed at least $12 million this way before anyone publicly called it out. He also trademarked the word "we." Then sold that trademark back to his own company for $5.9 million. The WeWork board approved. When reporters later asked about this, WeWork said Newman had returned the money. After getting caught, he traveled exclusively by private jet, a $60 million Gulfstream G650. The plane was reportedly stocked with tequila at all times. At one all-hands meeting, Newman served employees tequila shots at 9 a.m. He then played them a personally curated summer playlist. During working hours, former employees described an atmosphere somewhere between a startup and a cult. One executive said Adam would sometimes walk the offices barefoot, holding a guitar. Staff were encouraged to chant company mantras at events. The mission statement, to elevate the world's consciousness, was posted on office wall. And yet the media loved him. Forbes put him on the cover. Fast Company called WeWork the most innovative company in the world. JP Morgan gave Newman a $500 million personal line of credit. He used part of it to buy 5 homes, including a $35 million wave pool compound in the Hampton. Yes, a wave pool. He also owned a $21 million home in the Bay Area. A surf and yoga retreat in the Maldives. A 60-acre estate in Westchester, New York. Politicians toured WeWork offices as symbols of modern economic innovation. The company was reportedly in talks to run schools, apartment buildings, and even a city. Newman called it WeWorld. He told associates he wanted to become the world's first trillionaire. He said he wanted to live forever. He told at least one journalist he expected to become the president of the world. At the peak, WeWork was the most valuable private company in the United States. Worth more on paper than Ford, Marriott, and CBS combined. And Newman was personally worth $14 billion. But 3 people had begun asking uncomfortable questions. A journalist at the Wall Street Journal named Elliot Brown had been making calls for months. An analyst at a small research firm had started pulling on the lease liability thread. And deep inside WeWork's own finance team, a few people had grown very quiet. One of them had started keeping records. Because the IPO was coming. And an IPO means one thing above all else. You have to show the public your real numbers. On August 14, 2019, WeWork filed its IPO prospectus with the SEC. It was 350 pages long. Within 48 hours, the financial world had read every word. What they found was staggering. WeWork had lost $1.9 billion in 2018 alone. For every dollar it made, it spent $2. The $18 billion in lease obligations sat in plain black and white. The made-up, community-adjusted EBITDA metric was right there in the filing. Labeled. Disclosed. Completely indefensible. But it was page 12 that stopped people cold. The prospectus listed Adam Neumann as a risk factor. His own company warned investors that losing him could destroy the business. The man the company couldn't survive without had already cashed out $700 million in personal stock. Before the IPO. While employees still held shares they couldn't sell. The Wall Street Journal published a devastating breakdown the same week. Journalists had spent months documenting Neumann's self-dealing. The landlord scheme. The trademark sale. The tequila flight. Business Insider reported WeWork employees had signed strict NDAs preventing them from speaking out. The story collapsed fast. Within days, analysts began slashing the valuation. From $47 billion down to $20 billion. Then $15 billion. Then $10 billion. Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, who had both agreed to underwrite the IPO, grew nervous. They had staked their reputations on this offering. Now they were quietly telling associates the numbers didn't add up. Institutional investors, the pension funds, the asset managers, began pulling out. One fund manager told reporters he couldn't explain the valuation to his clients. There was no number that made sense, he said. On September 16, 2019, WeWork officially postponed the IPO. It was dead. And now the board had a bigger problem. WeWork was burning through $700 million in cash every quarter. Without the IPO funds, the company had weeks of runway left. SoftBank and JP Morgan began emergency financing talks. But there was a condition attached to every rescue package. Adam Neumann had to go. The board convened an emergency session. They presented Neumann with the math. He controlled nearly all the voting shares, he could technically fight them. But the company was days from bankruptcy. His own investors were threatening to pull emergency funding if he stayed. On September 24, 2019, Adam Neumann resigned as CEO of WeWork. He issued a statement saying the focus on him had become a distraction. He did not apologize. He did not return the tequila. But SoftBank needed him gone quickly and cleanly. So they offered him a deal that made financial journalists go completely silent. SoftBank agreed to buy out Neumann's remaining shares. They gave him $1.7 billion to walk away. $1.7 billion. To leave the company he had destroyed. He also received a $500 million credit line and a 4-year consulting contract. The man who had built a $47 billion illusion walked away richer than almost anyone involved. Meanwhile, WeWork's 12,500 employees were told to wait. Within weeks, the company announced it would cut 2,400 jobs. Nearly 20% of its entire workforce. Those employees had taken reduced salaries in exchange for stock options. Stock that was now essentially worthless. Some had worked at WeWork for years banking on that equity. It evaporated in a single earnings call. The company's chief communications officer sent employees a memo. It said WeWork was taking decisive action. It did not mention the $1.7 billion paid to the man who caused the crisis. SoftBank's Masayoshi Son later stood before cameras at an investor meeting. He held up a sign that said, "Bad judgment." He pointed to himself. He called the WeWork investment foolish. SoftBank had lost, by its own accounting, over $14 billion on WeWork. The largest single investment loss in venture capital history. But the story wasn't over. Because 3 years later, WeWork tried again. It went public through a SPAC merger in 2021, briefly valued at $9 billion. But the same broken model was still underneath. The lease liabilities hadn't shrunk. The losses hadn't stopped. And in November 2023, WeWork filed for bankruptcy. Owing over $10 billion to creditors. Every lease. Every tequila bottle. Every wave pool. Gone. When WeWork filed for bankruptcy in 2023, it owed money to over 600 creditors. Landlords across 39 countries were left holding broken leases. Thousands of small businesses had built their entire operations inside WeWork offices. Many showed up one morning to find the doors locked. No warning. No refund. The employees who lost their jobs fared even worse. Most had stock options priced at $47 billion valuation. When the company went bankrupt, those options were worth exactly nothing. Some had worked there for 5 years. Some had turned down better-paying jobs to bet on the mission. They lost that bet because a charismatic founder needed a fourth mansion. SoftBank's Vision Fund, the $100 billion vehicle that bankrolled WeWork, lost $27 billion total across all its bets in a single year. Pension funds that invested in the Vision Fund absorbed those losses. Teachers, nurses, government workers, people who never heard of Adam Neumann lost retirement savings because of him. Neumann himself remained extraordinarily wealthy. As of 2024, he had launched a new real estate startup called Flow. Andreessen Horowitz backed it with $350 million. The pitch sounded familiar. Community. Consciousness. Transformation. Some investors apparently didn't get the memo. But WeWork's collapse did change things, slowly, grudgingly, imperfectly. The IPO market became noticeably more skeptical of unprofitable unicorns. In 2019, a wave of money-losing tech companies had rushed toward public markets. Uber, Lyft, and Peloton all listed that year with enormous losses and enormous valuations. After WeWork, institutional investors started asking a question they had forgotten to ask. How does this company actually make money? The SEC began scrutinizing founder control structures more aggressively. Neumann had held supervoting shares giving him 20 votes per share. This meant shareholders couldn't remove him without his consent. Several exchanges quietly tightened their rules around dual-class share structures after 2019. The term, community-adjusted EBITDA, became a punchline in every finance classroom. It is now used as a textbook example of how invented metrics can mask catastrophic losses. Business schools added WeWork to their fraud and governance curriculum. Harvard, Wharton, and Stanford all published case studies within a year. The case study conclusion was almost always the same. The fraud wasn't hidden. The lease liabilities were disclosed. The self-dealing was technically reported. The made-up math was labeled as non-standard. Everything was technically visible to anyone who looked carefully. The problem wasn't deception. The problem was that nobody wanted the story to be false. SoftBank wanted a tech giant. JP Morgan wanted the underwriting fees. The media wanted a visionary founder narrative. The employees wanted the mission to be real. And so everyone looked at a landlord with a guitar and saw the future. That is the most dangerous kind of fraud. Not the kind that hides in darkness. The kind that hides in plain sight because everyone profits from the illusion. Adam Neumann never went to prison. He never faced criminal charges. He never gave back the $1.7 billion. The legal system found no crime, only catastrophically bad judgment exercised at catastrophically large scale. And that is perhaps the most unsettling lesson of all. You don't have to break the law to destroy thousands of lives. You just have to make sure everyone around you is too invested in your story to read the fine print. WeWork didn't collapse because one man was dishonest. It collapsed because an entire industry decided that believing in the story was more valuable than understanding the business. And as long as there are billion-dollar checks and 12-minute meetings, there will always be another Adam Neumann waiting in the lobby. Barefoot. Holding a guitar. Ready to elevate your consciousness, all the way to zero.